Hi, Pastor Mark here from Brantford Church of the Nazarene in Brantford, Ontario. Today I come from you from the the Windmill Country Market in Mount Pleasant, Ontario, just outside of Brantford. And there I'm doing my weekly Take a Break feature where I take a break from my regular schedule and I respond to questions of yours regarding the Bible or the Christian faith that you send to me either through email or through Facebook private message. Today's question is this. We live in an I'm okay, too bad you're not world. We've seen it during the COVID and now in BC with people hoarding products. What does Jesus think about this mentality? I think it can be summed up like this. I was able to buy toilet paper, too bad you weren't able to buy any. Well, I'm not just going to debate about the prominence of this mentality being today, whether it's prominent or dominant, but it certainly is out there. All we need to do is look at the grocery store shelves to see that people are buying things on panic buying, people are buying things and hoarding them, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. Now, admittedly today, some of this shortage has been caused by supply chain demands, strains on the supply chain demands, but some of it has been caused because of people hoarding for themselves and making sure that they get. So basically, the person who sent me this question, their question is, what does Jesus think about this mentality? Well, a few things I could say about this is one is, do you remember it was probably primarily our mothers used to say to us, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or treat others like you want to be treated. Now, that wasn't just a bit of sage advice that was given in a parenting handbook when people had had babies at the hospitals, handed them a parenting book. Actually, that comes straight from the Bible, which in my mind is a pretty good parenting book anyway. But it's words that Jesus said himself. We see that Jesus said this in what is known as his first recorded sermon, that we have commonly called the Sermon on the Mount, that we find in the New Testament book of Matthew. Jesus said this, so in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. So what would Jesus think about this mentality of hoarding or being selfish and things like that? He would tell us that what we need to do is to think of others and treat them as we would want to be treated. And a part of this thinking of others is thinking of them ahead of yourself even. I think Jesus would not only say treat them as you want to be treated, but treat them even ahead of yourself. That's why he also said, think of others before you think of yourself. In the end of the book of Matthew, he talks about that, about putting others first. He who is last shall be first, is the way he put it, kind of the reverse order how we would think about things. Well, this attitude that we have about panic buying and about hoarding is also indicative of a lack of trust of God. In that same Sermon on the Mount, which I just mentioned, just before Jesus said, treat others as you want to be treated, he also said this, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will drink, or about your body, what you will wear. In the context of this, Jesus is saying, trust in God. Don't trust in yourself to provide for yourself. He's not saying don't worry about anything as far as don't put any effort into securing things for yourself. But what he is saying, you shouldn't be focused on gaining for yourself and looking after yourself. We need to trust in God to be able to do that. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't take care of ourselves. Within this statement, Jesus is basically saying, he also says, instead of thinking about just yourself, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, he says in that statement, and all these things will be added to you. So if I could put it in today's phrase, some sound advice from Jesus would be, instead of seeking toilet paper, seek him. Now that's kind of in basic terms for us, but it's not saying that we don't look after the basic needs of life and look for those, but it's saying don't be worried about those things. Seek after him and look after him. Finally, I would say to us, when we treat others and how we treat others is indicative of the way of our own relationship with Jesus himself. Later on in the book of Matthew chapter 25, Jesus said this. He said, whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. And he follows that by saying, whatever you did not do for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did not do for me. Jesus is speaking in the context there of his second coming. And he's talking about what he calls dividing the sheep from the goats. He uses an analogy, we're dividing the sheep from the goats. And he talked to the people, well, whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me. And whatever you did not do for the least of these, you did not do for me. And the people didn't understand that. And they said, well, what do you mean by that? And he says, well, when you fed the least of these, you were feeding me. When you did not feed the least of these, you were feeding me. So how does that translate in today's life? If we're worried about hoarding for ourselves and not looking after other people and making sure they're okay too, in a sense, we're saying that's indicative of my relationship with God. I'm worried more about myself than I'm worried about anyone else. So especially in this time of a pandemic and what the people are going through in British Columbia there, the devastation down in the Vancouver area, we need to remember that we need to be thinking of other people too, and we need to be caring for them. So what does Jesus think about the mentality of I'm okay, you're okay, you're not okay, but that's too bad? What does he think about that? What he thinks about that is we need to first of all remember, think of others before ourselves. Our relationship with with others is indicative of our relationship with others, and we should be trusting in him and not trusting in ourselves to provide ourselves. Thanks again for joining me here for Take a Break with Pastor Mark, our weekly feature where I take a break from my regular schedule. And just a reminder, if you have a question about the Bible or a question about the Christian faith, if you could contact me either through email at brantnasmark, that's one word, brantnasmark@gmail.com, or through a private message here on Facebook, I'd love to respond to your questions. And as well, you're invited to join us on Sunday mornings, either in person at 347 Fairview Drive, Brantford, Ontario, or here online. We stream our services live on Facebook Sunday mornings, 10:30 on Facebook Live. We'll join you then. If not, look forward to being with you again next week for Take a Break with Pastor Mark. Thanks for joining me.